Hey, what's going on everyone on YouTube? In this video today we're going to be working on a 2009 Chevy Aveo5. The AC system has a problem. I hooked up the gauges and I noticed that the pressures are at zero, which tells me that there is no refrigerant in the AC system. So we got to diagnose and find out where the leak is at. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's get started. So before I start to diagnose the AC system, I always want to check the compressor. Unfortunately, the compressor is inside the fender well area, so I got to remove the wheel. What I'm going to do is I want to check to make sure that the compressor is not seized up. I'm going to use a socket 19 to remove the lug nuts. Anytime I'm lifting up a vehicle, I always use good quality jack stands, so I want to make sure that I'm safe. And I always use safety glasses. I got to protect my pretty eyes. Now I have to remove the side cover. I'm going to use a 10 metric socket in order to take out that cover. The 10 metric nuts were the only ones that were securing that cover, so it's easy to come right off. The right side pulley is the compressor. When checking the compressor to make sure it's not seized, we want to turn the clutch part of the pulley, not the actual pulley where the belt is at. So where the grooves are at, that's not what we're worried about. That's not what we want to turn. We want to turn the center part of that compressor, and it's going to spin freely, as you can see. No resistance at all, maybe very little, but I can turn it with no problem. That tells me the compressor's good, it's not seized. After checking the condition of the compressor, I put the wheel back on, and if you're wondering what torque spec I'm using, is 88 foot-pounds of torque for the lug nuts on the wheel. That is Chevy's recommendation. Now let's hook up the gauges. I forgot to mention that the blower motor is working, and also the AC light button is working as well in the AC control module in the cab. Let's hook up the low side coupler to the low side AC line. On most vehicles, you will notice that the low side line is the one that is the biggest diameter tube, and then the smaller diameter tube is the high side. So that's a good rule of thumb. There are some vehicles that some of them are the same size. Low side coupler is already installed to the low side port. Now let's get the high side coupler and insert it onto the high side port. Let's take a look at the gauges. If you notice that the low side, which is the blue gauge, and the high side, which is the red gauge, the needles are at zero. This indicates that there is no refrigerant in the AC system. So I'm going to open up the hand valves so that I can hook up the vacuum pump. So before I hook up the vacuum pump, I want to see if there is a leak in the condenser area. So you can see the condenser through the grill. And what I'm looking for is for any damp, oily spots. That indicates that that's a leak. When the refrigerant leaks out, oil also comes out with the refrigerant, with refrigerant oil, and it accumulates with all the dust and debris around it, and that's a good indication. But in this case here, I can't find anything. So I wonder if someone just didn't put refrigerant in it after they did some repairs to this engine at one time. I don't see any refrigerant leaks at the compressor as well. Again, no oily spots. Now I'm inspecting the low side line and make sure there's no oily spots there as well, and also on the high side line and at the evaporator area, the TXV. So everything looks good. So far, my visual test passed. Now let's vacuum the AC system. Make sure the hand valves and the manifold gauge are open so that the vacuum pump can vacuum throughout the whole AC system. I'm going to turn on the vacuum pump. With the vacuum pump on, you will notice the gauges are below zero. This is normal. When I'm vacuuming the AC system, I usually vacuum between 15 to 20 minutes. In my experience, this gives it enough time to remove any moisture from the AC system. Once I reach the desired time of vacuuming, then I turn off the vacuum pump, close the gauges, and I take a look at the needles. With the vacuum pump off and the valves closed, I wait for 10 minutes and keep an eye on the needles. I want to make sure that the needle is not rising to 0. If it is, that means it's an external leak. We do have a leak. In this case here, the low side gauge does go to 0. That tells me there's a leak. I did find the leak, and it was actually a loose coupler at the fitting. So I had to take care of that problem and start all over again. It had nothing to do with the AC system. It was my gauges. That was a problem, so I took care of that. Again, the problem was at the low side coupler at the fitting. So I started the vacuum process over again, and if you notice, the low side gauge is pegged out at 30 Hg. That's good. Let's charge the AC system, but first I want to let you know that we're gonna keep the low side and the high side gauge open to charge the AC system. The car is in the off position, the engine's not running. I want to charge as much as I can with the vehicle off. Once you have enough refrigerant in the AC system, before you start the vehicle, make sure you have the high side valve in the off position. Always have the high side valve closed when the engine's running and the AC is on. While the engine is on and the AC is running, I hooked up a thermometer to one of the vents, and I'm getting like 30 degrees Fahrenheit as I'm charging up the AC system. I continue adding refrigerant until the low side line gets cold. And I'm also paying attention to the thermometer. I want to make sure around 34, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. In this case here, I had it around 30 because the ambient temperature was around 69 degrees Fahrenheit. I closed all the AC vents except the one by the evaporator. This gives me the best accurate temperature. I placed the blower motor to the number 1 position because I wanted the compressor to cycle on and off, and it did. That happened, so there's no more problems. AC problem is solved. Well, thanks for watching. I hope this video helped you out. If you have any comments or have any questions, please write them down below. I'll get to them as soon as possible. And please subscribe to my channel and also hit the like button. See you later.